With Sony coming out of nowhere and emerging as champion of the previous console war, contenders Sega and Nintendo were looking to claim their once held top spots. As with the previous generations, Sega would strike first with what most considered to be the most ahead of its time gaming system ever made.
On September 9th, 1999, Sega released the Dreamcast in North America. Being 15 times more powerful than any of the consoles made in the previous generation, Sega drew from every resource to ensure that the Dreamcast was the ultimate gaming system. Even so far as to partnering with Microsoft to port over an optimized version of Windows CE to run the system software. The system was met with a better than warm reception at launch. With great titles like Sonic Adventure, Crazy Taxi, and Soul Calibur, it was apparent that the next generation was in full swing and Sega was back on track.
The Dreamcast was amazing, and selling over 500,000 units in its first 2 weeks, Sega proved that they not only were still relevant, but also pioneers in the industry. It appears the Dreamcast was the ladder Sega needed to pull themselves out of the hole the Saturn dug. Unfortunately, things would be short-lived.
You see, 6 months before Sega launched the Dreamcast, Sony announced their new system, the PlayStation 2, in an attempt to deter Sega Dreamcast sales. This tactic would prove to be unsuccessful, as the Dreamcast had a spectacular launch. Now in 1999, the world was undergoing a shift in popular media. Internet and digital media were becoming more popular, and the long-time mainstream VHS video format was fastly being phased out by the superior DVD. Shortly after the release of the Dreamcast, the tide was immediately turned, as Sony confirmed that the PlayStation 2 would have DVD playback, something the Dreamcast could not do. Sega tried to compete with the DVD playback announced by Sony by announcing their system's dedicated internet server, and even attempting to make an MP3 add-on for the Sega Dreamcast. But it was all in vain. For the first time in the history of the console wars, something other than a game would serve as a leg up on the competition.
This trend of media add-ons would continue to be a selling point for game companies, even to this day. The PS2 hadn't even launched, but Sony had done a great job setting the stage.
In October of 2000, Sony launched the PlayStation 2 in North America. The system was a huge success, with numbers far exceeding that of Sega's launch for the Dreamcast. Similar to Nintendo with the N64, Sony couldn't produce PS2s fast enough to meet consumer demand. Stores couldn't keep the PlayStation 2 on the shelves. The lukewarm launch titles did little to stall the system's sales. The PlayStation 2's DVD playback proved to be a tremendous success, as the Matrix DVD was one of the top-selling items purchased with PlayStation 2s. Sony was back with the vengeance and immediately re-established their dominance. The slow production of PS2s gave Sega a fighting chance during holiday season of 2000. But by March of 2001, Sega announced the Sega Dreamcast would be discontinued. Sega could no longer compete financially with Sony. Once again, Sony put away Sega in under a year.
It's a shame we never got to see the Dreamcast utilized to its full potential. Although its lifespan was short, the Dreamcast was a great, innovative system. With Sega out the picture, it was now Nintendo's turn to go a second round with Sony.
In November of 2001, Nintendo released the GameCube. A 128-bit system itself, the GameCube hit the market with all the Nintendo staples. Remembering how bad Sony hurt them in the previous generation with games like Resident Evil and Metal Gear Solid, Nintendo secured rights to exclusive titles of both franchises. With games like Resident Evil 4 and Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, the GameCube was worth a look by a PS2 enthusiast. However, with its limited third-party support and no external media playback, Nintendo hardly put a dent into what Sony established with the PS2. So Nintendo changed its focus and dubbed themselves an entertainment-only company, and targeted their demographic more towards family and children, a completely different demographic than Sony. By declaring themselves to not be in direct competition with Sony, the GameCube enjoyed a great deal of success outside of direct competition.
It appears Sony was in a league of their own, eliminating SEGA within the first 6 months of the launch of the PlayStation 2, and forcing Nintendo to change their target demographic. It appears nothing could stop the Sony PlayStation 2. However, a dark horse was slowly beginning to rise.
While working with SEGA to port over Windows CE for the Dreamcast, Microsoft toyed with the idea of entering the video game market. With the fall of the Dreamcast, Microsoft reached out to SEGA and sought advisement. SEGA and Microsoft collaborated, and the Xbox was born. Being released in the same month as the GameCube, the Xbox was slightly overlooked, but little by little, word was beginning to spread about the system that was more powerful than the industry-leading PlayStation 2. In November of 2002, Microsoft made its first real strike when they launched XBOXLIVE, a dedicated online gaming service unlike anything that had been seen on a home console. Sony had a network adapter add-on, but was faulty, and Sony Online had nowhere near the quality of the Xbox.
When people realized that they could play and communicate with their friends without ever having to leave their house, Microsoft had a huge selling point. Sony now had a direct competitor.
Xbox Live helped Microsoft not only compete with Sony, but Microsoft was beginning to gain ground. Being graphically superior was definitely a plus. Having DVD playback and built-in memory made the Xbox a superior piece of hardware over the PS2. And with Xbox Live, Microsoft had the software to match. Realizing how important online gameplay was to this generation, Sony amped up the PlayStation's online capabilities. In 2004, when they released a new slim PS2 with an online adapter built in. It definitely saw success. However, late 2004 was the year Bungie launched Halo 2 for the Xbox, the best online multiplayer game of this generation. For the next year, Sony and Microsoft duked it out in a neck-and-neck race. However, with franchises like God of War, Metal Gear Solid, and Grand Theft Auto, Microsoft came up short, and Sony maintained its industry dominance. But Microsoft, having seen tremendous success, would go another round with Sony.
In late 2005, Microsoft launched their next generation system. Sony and Nintendo were soon to follow after, which is the console war we're currently in the closing stages of. In early 2013, Sony finally discontinued the PS2, making it the longest running and most successful gaming system of all time. As long as there's a market for the gaming industry, there'll be competition. And the foundation that Nintendo and Sega set early in the 90s echoes to this very day. Whether Nintendo versus Sega or Sony versus Microsoft, the gaming industry needs the console wars. Innovation must be pushed forward and technology must constantly improve. It's a necessity in this industry. And we are eagerly anticipating this upcoming console war and any of those to follow. Until next time, this is Ness, signing out.